Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of ANOW Profile. Today's guest is a Danish writer, a photographer, and a former professional soldier, Peter Hovmand. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Some of the themes and tropes he deals with in his writing include the experience of warfare, love in contemporary society, the subject of friendship, strength, struggles, personal ones, external ones, adventure, even suicide. His debut novel was written in 1998 and called Til det yderste. His work is untranslated, including his debut novel, which is an interesting novel, I think. And although it's untranslated, it might be translated as to the extreme or the edge, to the edge. Peter Hovmand, welcome to ANOW. Should we start with your first novel, since it's your debut novel?
It's not exactly a novel.
Right.
It's you could call it my military memoirs, even though I was quite young when it was published, and it's dealing with only half a year in the Foreign Legion. But it was I was very focused on the training and the effect it has on the recruits and how it's working. It's the old-fashioned way of doing it, you could say.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And you volunteered for the Foreign Legion.
Yes, I was 18 years old, and I'm not 18 years old anymore.
No.
So it's a long time ago, but I remember it quite well.
I think you deal with that topic in the book as well. Why people, indirectly at least, why people volunteer for the Foreign Legion. You mentioned sometimes the kind of romantic spirit, those that don't have a choice. Which category did you belong to?
Well, I guess I was romantic, idealistic. We just had the beginning of the civil war in ex-Yugoslavia. It was 92. Yeah. It's a long time ago, and people already forgot that we had this killing in the middle of Europe, even in 92. I was very horrified by it, and I thought we were supposed to do something about it, but it turned out that there was no political will, and that's why I left.
So the reason for joining in the first place was?
Of course, to be a professional soldier, but also with the purpose of doing good for Europe. Yeah. So it made sense in an idealistic way, you could say.
So the romantic aspect is tied to some sort of ethic in this sense?
Yes, I guess so, yeah.
Okay. When I read, there is a passage, or maybe even a few passages in your books, and I also know you personally. So the way I've interpreted this kind of romantic aspect is in a different way as well. That it's kind of a personal adventure.
That's the way you could interpret it afterwards.
Maybe I'm wrong.
And afterwards, I can see that as well, that I was a bit romantic, maybe even naive. Yeah. That's easy to say afterwards, but it's also meant as a critique of the politics in Europe, that we don't really do much for other people. And I'm very sorry about that.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I'm not impressed with our efforts in Syria either, but that's a totally different subject.
Yeah. Because, I mean, although there is a lot of attention on, when it comes to fiction and popular culture in general, when it turns to warfare, I wouldn't really exactly place you in contemporary. I mean, you're writing on war. Soldiers, or you're thinking about this, it's almost a bit untimely.
Well, thank you. Well, that's a nice thing to hear as a writer, but I think some of the topics are classical. Of course, my first book is dealing with the training of young soldiers and how they developed. And of course, it's very focused, but it's not going to change that much. I think, at least not in the Legion. Other places they are more flexible, I guess, in the way to do it, but they don't get the same result either.
In terms they're not do what exactly?
Well, it's the method in the Legion is quite rough, I should say, and it's classical things of like not too much food when you're getting the training and not too much sleep and stuff like that. And of course, when you're in a war, you're supposed to get as much food as you can and as much sleep as possible, because you want to be ready when things are happening.
Yeah.
But the training-wise, it has to train the soldiers to get used to the lack of these things.
Yes.
But there are different ways of doing that, of course.
Is there something special about the French Legion, even today?
Well, of course. It's very old unit, and the main special thing about it is that the people in it are from all kinds of countries, and with different backgrounds, and most of the volunteers there, they're all volunteers. They are professional soldiers beforehand. They have different reasons to go there, of course, and they all miss something in their life that they hope to get there.
Okay. So it's like a panacea, a solution to all the world's...
No, you could look at it historically. After Second World War, most of the volunteers were Germans, and they was a big part of the Foreign Legion's efforts in Indochina and in Algeria, and they were pretty good at what they are doing, but they didn't win the wars because it was unwinnable. And later on, like nowadays, I think most of the volunteers are from Poland, at least before they became a part of the European Union. And I still think they quite enjoy to use that kind of training, and it gives them some kind of status when they come back. Many of my earlier books are dealing with this subject at a very personal level. I have not myself been to war, I must say. I've been training for it several times, but never got the chance. 5 times, right? You know. No, professional soldier 5 times. No, 3 times, but I've been to 5 different regiments. Okay. Yeah. But I think it's quite interesting subject, even as a philosophical problem. Yes. Because why are we making war? And there are, of course, different reasons. And that I'm not dealing with it at a political level that much in my writing. It's more like a personal level, the psychological part of it, I would say. Yeah. Why do you think it's an important philosophical theme? Because people don't want to understand it, and that's at least in Denmark, when something is very horrible and it's very hard to do something about it. People say, "Oh, I don't understand," but I don't appreciate that kind of talking, because we should try to understand war and why it happens, and that's why I think it's an important philosophical question. Yes. But I'm dealing it more psychological, I think, in my books. That's interesting. The journalist, I can't remember her first name, but Falacci, I don't know if you... No. But Italian journalist. She was very interested in warfare. Like actually many philosophers as well. Heidegger was interested in war, and Hannah Arendt, struggle and conflict. And there is a claim somewhere that brings out the human, because one of the aspects is the proximity to death. Yeah, I guess so. I'm not an expert though. Yeah. But in my first writings, in the first book and also some of the short stories that I made later, I noticed, now I'm looking at it from another angle, that I really tried to look at the psychological part of it, how people felt in these kind of situations.
Yeah.
And of course it's mainly fiction, but it's also observations of professional soldiers I met myself and how they're dealing with everyday life after the war.
Yeah.
Of course I don't have the war experience myself, so I can only look at what I saw afterwards with these people. And I know quite a lot of soldiers, even before, even after the Legion, and Danish soldiers that went to Afghanistan and stuff like that.
There has been some attention now in contemporary kind of fiction, also some films and documentaries like Korengal and the concern with Afghanistan crisis, war, and Iraq as well. There was The Hurt Locker by Catherine Bigelow, and and another Jünger, not the one we might talk about later.
No, Jünger.
Jünger,
yeah, American, yeah.
Yeah, the American. Do you think that has done sufficient justice to covering contemporary, that kind of conflict between the experience of warfare in the battlefield or in the theater of war, and then the kind of clash between coming back to...
It's never enough, and it's a big problem.
It's a big claim.
Yeah, it's...
never enough.
No, because people don't want to understand it, and they want to forget it, and they don't want to deal with it. And it's a big problem in America. And the fact is that I think there are like 20 American veterans kill themselves. I can't remember if it's every day or every week, but it's a lot, and it's horrible. And it's not only from Afghanistan, but all the veterans they have in America. So I think people have to take it seriously at a political level as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, perhaps this is, forgive me for saying so, but if you draw that to a conclusion, that line of thought, that if you just ultimately we're pacifistic societies in civil society, but if we become very concerned with what the military activity actually is, we become ultimately militaristic. And that's a different type of society. Would you like to see that sort of society?
No, of course not. But I think we have to find a middle way somehow. But that's not the topic of dealing with the veterans. Mm-hmm. I think it's more about facing the truth about what war can do to people, and we have to deal with it afterwards and try to understand these people, and not just think of them as people who are not trustworthy anymore. They're weak, but actually a lot of them are quite strong still mentally. Yeah. I'm not only looking at the negative parts. No, I noticed a lot of my former comrades who went to Afghanistan and trained with them before and was supposed to go with them but didn't have the chance to go. They actually do quite well afterwards and are pretty strong young men and doing what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also quite important to focus on. That to be a veteran is not just a bad thing. It can be a positive thing. Yeah.
What would you say are some of those positive aspects that we can learn, that perhaps that we can learn?
Well, to understand human beings as a whole, because this is the dark side. You could say we don't want to understand why people go to war. We don't want to understand how it is possible, but. I think it will be. We will learn a lot by looking more into that and dealing with these kind of problems. So, yeah.
Does this, to change the topic a little bit, but does this? Once I asked you, and I don't know how serious your answer was, but you said that you were a combination of three kind of cultural figures.
No, I can't remember. No.
You said that you were a combination of Hemingway, Knut Hamsun, the Norwegian Danish writer, and Ernst Jünger.
Oh yeah. Well, I
you
can
stick
see,
by that.
Yeah, well,
trilogy.
that would be nice to be a combination of these three great writers.
Yeah.
And Hamsun is definitely Norwegian.
Yes,
but I think that's more like wishful thinking. But I guess they did some things to me.
Yes.
I studied comparative literature after I was a soldier, and of course I find these writers very important, and they inspired my writing, at least. Hemingway is probably the best writer of short stories. Ernst Jünger is probably the best writer on war, and Knut Hamsun is probably one of the very best writers in Scandinavia. And one thing people forget about Knut Hamsun is that he wrote most of his best books before 1900. That's a long time ago.
Yes.
He was ahead of his time in developing literature in new ways.
Yeah. Can you say a bit more about that? In what sense he was ahead of his time?
Well, yeah, I wrote a small book about him actually,
Yes.
called Knut Hamsuns Allure.
It's a commentary on the full title is Knut Hamsun's Revolt, maybe if you translate it, and it's Hamsun. And the subtitle is Hamsun, Nietzsche, and the Revolt Against the Modern Society.
Yes.
And it's from 2013.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, well, what did he develop as a writer? The main thing is probably the very problematic main character, who of course was developed even by Dostoevsky and probably also other writers before that. But Jünger is very modern. I mean, Dostoevsky was the first modern writer maybe, but Knut Hamsun developed it more into at least something we can recognize as a part of modern society, and a character trying to struggle with the ability or lack of ability to be a free human being.
Yeah.
And that's quite new. Another new thing is he developed the storyteller in fiction as a very self-focused storyteller, which is kind of interesting.
Like self-reflection.
As well, yeah.
Yeah.
But of course it's fiction.
This this kind of relationship between the literary world and the thinking world and the soldier. I mean, that's a combination that it's not exactly rare, but it's an interesting combination. You see,
well, most people would say that that's not normal and we never saw that before, but that's not true. Of course,
Sure.
we have a lot of the great writers after the First World War. They had been to the war,
yeah.
and the same thing after Second World War.
Would you
and
call it
after
the writer soldier or the thinker soldier or something like that?
You could call it that. And of course, the most important one of these is Ernst Jünger.
You would say so.
Yeah, absolutely.
In what you mean in the post-World War or the 20th century, basically?
Both.
Yeah.
Because he went all the way.
Okay. Would you like to?
It's a very difficult topic,
Okay.
but I would say for example, if you look at his first 3 books, the first one is covering the whole of the First World War, his experience, and the second one is dealing with a month.
And the first one is Storm of Steel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second one is dealing with a month, and the third one is dealing with a week. So he's a man who can write thick books with a special focus, and I admire that very much. And of course, it's possible. I mean, I wrote a thick book about 6 months myself, so I know that was easy.
Yeah.
But to write about a week.
Which book was that? Was that?
That's the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how would you actually? I know that you've been toying with the idea of translating your debut
to the limit. I think
to the limit.
Yeah, but it's not finished yet.
No.
As a translation.
But that's your working title.
Yeah.
Well, might we look forward to seeing it translated, or is there a word for future publishers?
No, I don't know. Okay. It's difficult.
Yes.
It's not my main focus in life.
I know you're a modest man, but I've read your books, save I think for the Westjylland guidebook.
Yeah,
But I have certainly read your debut novel with not just once. I've dipped back into it, and I think that's a very interesting. I would like to call it novel, actually.
It's not a novel, but I can see what you mean, that it has this development in the character.
Yeah.
And especially it's easy to understand for the reader.
I wouldn't exactly place it if I could choose. If I owned a book, if I owned a Waterstones at the airport, I wouldn't place it in the non-fiction. I would place it in the fiction still.
Okay, thank you.
But
at least I deal with some of the same psychological topics in my other books, especially my short stories, I should say.
What I wanted to say was that I think I know that it was a very recognized book in Denmark at the time.
Yes, still is.
And still is. But it's a shame to some extent that we have in the Nordics barriers between the countries.
The language.
We don't. Yes, but it is, of course.
It didn't used to be like that.
I mean, we've discussed relationships across the Nordic countries before. For example, with the connection that the Danish Brandes, literary professor that connected Nietzsche with August Strindberg. And
a lot of writers in the whole of Northern Europe, actually.
You're not just Danish literature, you're Nordic literature or Scandinavian literature.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see this book, which I think it would be nice to see it internationally, and some of your other writings as well.
Yeah, well, that's a dream, but I'm not sure it's that easy.
Okay. But to get back to Ernst Jünger, I remember you saying that you had a lot of respect for him, and that you didn't trust him in every single, because he wrote many books and on many different topics. But if there was one topic you trusted him on, it was on war.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What is it that why is he trustworthy in that realm compared to others? He deals with drugs, for example.
Yes, well, he is very honest, I think. Yeah. And he goes into detail, as we talked about before. And he's going all the way, much longer than it's like almost it's unhuman, because he goes really deep into I think it's called the aesthetics of what is it called in English, of terror, the aesthetics of terror.
Yes.
And he has no fear. He went beyond fear, so he can go into it even more than, I don't think any other writer went this far, actually.
When you say go far, but what do you mean in exploring the subject matter?
Yes, even at a philosophical level, but he shows it so it's understandable. He uses metaphors at a larger level.
Yes.
And it's kind of scary, actually.
Someone, not you, but someone else said that the level of or was it sanity that he accounts for something? The fact that he can account for the insane almost experience of the First World War with such level of sobriety.
Exactly.
That he's he's a sober account. In fact, in
and
a sense,
even cold.
Cold. That's same sentiment. That he can do that is in itself kind of insane.
Yes, it is, and I think.
The reference here for our listeners, viewers, should be then Storm of Steel and the War Diaries as well, or?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
And the first couple of books he wrote, absolutely.
Which ones are they?
I can't remember.
Okay, right.
At least I think his second book. No, I think his fourth book was actually a philosophical book.
Yeah.
I can't remember the title though.
Is it Hume'sville?
No.
That's later.
No.
That's after. That's in the.
It's from. I think it's from 1924.
Yeah.
He was very early in with his First World War books, actually.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the numbers.
How is Nietzsche important to you?
Yes, he is. I think I agree with most of his points, actually. But I don't. I look at him in a very humanistic perspective, in a very positive perspective. I don't think of him as something negative.
No.
I think that is a misunderstanding.
What do you mean more precisely?
Well, he's not dealing with the idea of the übermench as the main thing.
No.
I think the main thing is the idea of to make people more individual, strong people, and be more free. And then you could call it übermench and something in the future, maybe in 1,000 years.
Yes.
But it's not about making master races here and now. It has nothing to do with that.
No, that might be a bit too simple.
Well, absolutely.
You probably raised this against the background of the Nazi appropriation of some of his thinking.
Yes, well, that has nothing to do with Nietzsche.
No, but that's why you.
Yeah, of course.
That's what you contrast with.
Yes, that's why I mentioned it, because
yeah,
people who don't read Nietzsche, they think he has something to do with Nazism, and he has nothing to do with Nazism.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite.
To these three figures, so Hemingway, Ernst Jünger, Hamsun, I know that Hunter S. Thompson, he was very much kind of impressed and wanted to learn from the best. And those two people that he often referred to were Hemingway and Gatsby and Fitzgerald. And he copied Gatsby's novel several times over. Would you say that your inspiration in out of those three, similar to that you have, they are kind of people that you wanted to emulate in order to find your own voice? Or?
Yes, I would say that. But I mean, for me, Knut Hamsun came in quite late. So, but I noticed that, for example, Hemingway was very inspired by Knut Hamsun.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And was there a moment when you found a voice, a literary voice?
Well, I think I developed it from the beginning, and I was quite personal in my voice, I guess, and people appreciated that, so I stuck to that. But the difference is that my first book was like me as a storyteller. That's the way I thought about it. And the other books are more like fiction, most of them. And I'm thinking about it at another distance. And that makes a big difference for me, of course.
And what's an important for other writers or budding writers out there? What advice would you give them?
I don't know. Start with writing short stories. Yeah. Read Hemingway.
Read Hemingway.
Yeah. Of course, they probably heard that before.
Why is that a good tip?
Because he's also very precise and going straight to the point. And it's important. Because what are you writing about? You're writing about problems in human life, and you have to focus because there are so many problems, and you can't deal with all of them in one thing.
Is there ultimately an important? Is it a luxury fiction, or does it have an important role to play in our societies?
Well, of course, I think it's very important,
yes.
And I mean, it's not the most important thing. I think science, it might be a little bit more important, but science all to itself, like this is the truth about everything, is very dangerous, because we are not gods. We still, as human beings, have to try to understand ourselves. And I don't think science is the key to understand human beings. I think fiction, literature, is the key.
Yeah.
I don't even philosophy is storytelling. History, science is storytelling. Most things, in some way or the other, end up being storytelling.
Right. Yeah.
And what is the interesting thing in this? It's people trying to understand people, even in philosophy and psychology. So, of course, the key to this is to appreciate the importance of literature in a broader sense.
I know that you have embarked fairly recently on an alternative career, which is teaching.
Yeah.
And I understand that you find that very satisfying and also important.
Yes, of course. I teach in Danish literature, and in high school or junior college, what you call it. And it's much more fulfilling than sitting alone at home for 10 years writing books read by maybe 1,000 people.
Yeah.
A lot more people read my first book, but that's a long time ago. Yeah. I think it's very fulfilling to teach young people trying to learn, because some of them they listen, and it develops them in certain aspects and makes them into better human beings, and I think that's quite important.
One of the topics we deal with is the role of the intellectual in contemporary societies, and perhaps one thesis is that it's quite a marginal role to what it was or should be.
In most of the Western world, it's quite marginal.
Yeah.
I think they still have.
Do you lament this?
Yeah, I think in France they still have some importance, and maybe France can teach the rest of us. I think Macron will try to deal with that. Yeah. That's the hope, I guess. No, I think it's also because of science getting more space. Yeah. And that's not just a bad thing. I think it could also be a way, but of course the main problem is the importance of money in the world we live in. People think about money way too much.
What about celebrity? Because in some sense the public intellectual is a celebrity figure or a known person, and perhaps that has been taken over by a more pop cultural figure.
Yes, of course, yeah. But it's also the fascination of them being rich, I think. It's also a key to the respect of celebrities, is if they're rich and they're earning a lot of money. Yeah. Then they don't even have to say anything intelligent. They just have to be successful in earning money. It's a big problem in our society, I guess.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, because it's destroying the importance of being aware of what the problems of the world is or are, and I mean, I think Nietzsche would say that the thing didn't go the right way so far.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, a bit about your biography. You're the grandson of an acclaimed film director, Anneliese
Hovmand, yeah.
Yeah, Hovmand. Same last name.
Yeah, same last name, yeah. Yeah, she died half a year ago, so I think of her a lot still. Miss her. Well, it was quite nice for me as a young man to be able to look up to my own flesh and blood in that way, because she had done quite well. And first of all, I know her as the owner of a cinema in Denmark. So as a kid, I went to the cinema a lot, and that was quite nice.
Was it in Copenhagen?
No, it was in a small town south of Copenhagen.
Okay. Is it still?
Yes, she sold it 10 years ago.
It exists in the shape of a cinema still?
Yes, it does.
Interesting.
And the main hall is called Anneliese Hovmand.
Okay. The main theater space?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They named it after her. Yeah.
So in a sense, are you part of Danish cultural elite or establishment?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Your family?
Well, I don't think so. No. But at least I think I have some importance as a teacher. And some of my books have influenced some young men, I hope. And I get letters maybe twice a year, something like that.
Yeah.
So it has been important to some people, but no, I'm not elite. I'm just a high school teacher.
Yes, that's very modest of you. Would you? Are you? Would you say that you are an intellectual?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is an intellectual to you?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's someone interested in the problems of the world.
Yeah.
And trying to understand them all the time, more or less. Using their spare time on trying to get wise on the problems of mankind.
Yeah. What drives your intellectual engagement? Do you have what's your fuel, so to speak?
It's to make the reader or the listener more aware of themselves as an interpreter of what they see and hear. It's the same awareness that Nietzsche is trying to give the reader.
Yeah. And you often make reference, the same reference, I think, to Karen Blixen. You say, I have a, what is it, 4,000 years old?
No, yeah, that's meant as a joke.
Sure, really, but not only. There is some severity in it.
Yes, of course we owe a lot to the old Greeks. And of course Nietzsche owes a lot to Plato, a lot. So we should be aware of that, and the fact that history repeats itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't end all wars with First World War, obviously.
No.
And the death of history, the end of history, has not come yet.
Fukuyama.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was wrong.
Yes.
We still have a lot of work to do. And I don't even think that mankind as a whole has become more wise in the last 100 years.
Because that's what the concern is when you say that my soul is 4,000 years old. I mean, what that means, if I'm not mistaken, it sort of means to say that, you know, my thinking is not unique. I've inherited a long tradition of the Western canon and well, I have to.
Our culture is at least 4,000 years old. You could say it that way, and we should be aware of that. And
that's a concern with wisdom.
Yes, and to understand that these things are like standing on the shoulders of giants, right. You could say.
Yes, okay.
Nietzsche is not the first philosopher, but he might be the last. No, that's a joke as well. Yeah. I also wrote a few short stories on women. I'm not sure they're very good though.
Or accurate.
But of course the subject is my own experiences. And I'm a man, so maybe some of my best short stories are about my childhood experience, because there's a certain distance, and you can understand a lot of it. Even from my youth,
yes,
it also has some kind of distance. So you can look at the psychological games people play with each other and understand them.
Yeah.
I guess my one prerequisite as a writer is that you can remember these things. And most people don't want to remember all the problems and letdowns they had in their life.
Right.
But I remember, and I find it quite interesting.
And so how does that deal with the struggle of becoming a strong man, or the strong? What does that have to do with the strength? Why is strength? Because strength is
well. Let's not talk about becoming a strong man.
Okay.
It could be becoming a more what is it called in English? A more conscious being.
Yes. Okay.
More critical.
Yeah.
Of the information you get all the time. We live in information age. Information
knowledge
Ragnarok maybe.
Ragnarok. Yeah.
And I think it's more important than ever that we become critical.
Yeah.
Just look at fake news as a new topic.
Many things could be meant by critical. What do you mean by this term?
That you put a question mark to everything, more or less.
Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean negative in its connotation.
It's not necessarily negative.
Recovering from brain injury, is this something that is poorly understood?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like a taboo.
Is it?
I feel it that way, because if people think you're brain damaged, then you're very stupid and you can't do anything. And of course you're not up to 100% right after the incident, but it depends on the how big the injury is, of course. But you should never give up. You should keep on improving your abilities, and that goes for people without brain injury as well. I put it as a parallel, because that's what people think about veterans. If they're injured in the head, then they think it's post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
Because they have some of the similarities, and they have some of the same way of reacting afterwards. I noticed. So there's a parallel, you could say.
There are some really interesting and fascinating passages, and one of them, one of the most gripping ones, is one where it's mentioned that you can think of suicide as a friend.
Yes, well, at least that's your final freedom, you could say.
Yes.
But I don't suggest it unless you're in a lot of pain.
No, but it's an important. It's the idea that there is an exit.
Yes, you could say that. I'm mentioning it in the book to try to show how serious a situation these young or older men are in.
Yes.
If they got an injury or if they have trauma of some sort, even after a car accident or other kind of struggles. It can end very fast, and it does for a lot of veterans in America, as I told before.
Yes,
suicide rate is high. A lot of suicides.
Yeah, so I mean, so
every week.
So it's not. So suicide is not just taken from thin air. It's actually strongly related to the experience of being a soldier and having experience.
And even in Denmark, there's a lot of suicide among older veterans, especially those from ex-Yugoslavia.
And what might one attribute that to? Do you have an idea?
We didn't deal with it properly. Right. We have to respect these people more, and we have to take their problems more seriously. Yeah. And I even think we can benefit in many ways by doing so. I can't help thinking about how I started to deal with my own injury in 2001. I remember that I noticed that I wasn't very fit in my brain, but I thought it was quite interesting because I was still myself, and I noticed that I was improving. Right. My speech. In the beginning, I couldn't talk. I couldn't say proper words, and I couldn't read. After a week, I could write, but nobody could read what I wrote, not even myself. Yeah. I couldn't spell, stuff like that. But I improved pretty quickly, and I thought that was quite interesting.
So you could almost reflect on yourself with sharpness about yourself being brain damaged.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I do that in the novel as well.
Yes,
and I think there's a little bit of Ernst Jünger in there, I must say.
In what sense?
The distance to myself and my brain.
Yes, that's what's fascinating. How is that possible?
Well, I find it interesting.
So another reference to Ernst Jünger, I remember he was interviewed in a documentary quite late in life by two Swedes actually.
Yeah.
Went to his house.
Yes.
Did you see that documentary?
Yes, I did.
But in that they say, they ask him, do you see your life as an adventure? And he answers, yes, but you have to have the optics, the optique.
Yes, of course.
To appreciate that.
Yes, he looks at life through a prism. Mm-hmm. That's what he does. I hope I do too.
What kind of? I mean, not just any prism, surely.
No, but it's a metaphor. Mm. It's like that you are aware that you don't look at reality directly because it's not possible.
You mean that he's aware that he's looking at it through a prism?
Yes.
Right. Yes. A filter or something.
Yeah. And you are interpreting what you see, always.
Yes, I see.
Hermeneutics of our understanding.
Hermeneutics. And hermeneutics of hermeneutics in your case with your
with
your youth, the interpretation of the interpretive organ of your brain.
Also that, and also the interpretation of my youth and my time.
Yes, whatever object.
Anything, yeah.
But when I heard that, it struck me as something, and I thought about I thought that, well, thinking of your own life as an adventure, not everyone does. But if someone would be a good candidate, I think that maybe you could be one.
Thank you.
Do you think of your life as an adventure?
Adventure is not the right word,
right.
but I think of my life so far of being full of many different things, stages, mm-hmm. and it has been maybe too interesting, you could say. I wish that I had an easier life than this one. My childhood was not easy, and my youth was not easy, and of course the first 10 years after my injury in 2001 was not easy. Mm. But on the other hand, I'm proud that I survived this rough life I wouldn't have been without it, you could say.
Would you be a writer without it?
Probably not.
No.
But I noticed that when I started to be a little bit intellectual in high school myself,
yes.
I noticed that I had had some special experiences as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been to 7 different schools, even before high school.
Yes.
That's a lot. So I was always a bit of an outsider, always dealing with the social constructions in different ways.
Mm.
And
aware of them.
Yes, and I was aware of them. And I didn't respect them necessarily. And you have to respect them if you want to be part of the party.
Mm.
Yeah. Even then, I knew, maybe at the age of 20, that I had some stories in me.
Mm.
And I don't have imagination. Not
you
really.
don't?
No, not really. I need stuff from real life to work with.
Okay, and you're willing to pay a high price, I think you said once, for
yes,
this.
but not anymore. I think I paid enough. I think I paid enough, yeah.
Peter Hovmand, thank you. It's been fantastic to have you here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Would you like to come back?
Absolutely.
When you have written the next book?
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah.